coming soon. I do know that there's more cars coming in, so we'll probably have some additional people filtering in, but I don't want to delay too much longer. We're going to get started. Okay. Again, good evening. I want to welcome you to the Utica College Forum on Hydrofracking. My name is Sharon Kanfush, and I'm an associate professor in the geology department at the college, and I will be moderating this evening's event. As many of you already know, New York State is currently considering whether or not to allow high-volume hydraulic fracturing, otherwise known as hydrofracking, within the state. This is an activity that's currently being done in several other states, including our neighboring Pennsylvania to the south. Based upon the experiences elsewhere, we anticipate that hydrofracking, if permitted in New York, will bring with it potential implications for the economy, the environment, and human health. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has written a report discussing many of these potential impacts, and they have asked for public comment on the report called the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement. Through the hard work of my colleague, Adam Schoonmaker in the Department of Geology, we have put together a panel of 5 specialists, each possessing expertise in a differing aspect of this important topic. We hope that the information you receive tonight will be of value as you seek to be informed and ask informed questions and make informed decisions about this very controversial and complex issue. The structure for this evening's event will consist of, first of all, a series of 10-minute presentations by each of our 5 panelists. We ask that everyone maintain a quiet and respectful tenor throughout the presentations, and please refrain from posing oral questions. We have tried very hard to put together a balanced panel, and so we just want to ensure that everybody is heard. Following all 5 of the presentations, so after about 50 minutes, we will actually take a short recess, 5 to 10 minutes at the most, to bring some tables up to the front and bring our panelists up to the front and get ready for the question and answer portion of this evening. At that time, certainly feel free to leave the room and make use of the restrooms if needed. After that short recess, we'll bring everybody back, and we'll first of all begin with a series of questions developed by the organizing committee. While we're doing that, we also have placed on each of the seats an index card that looks like this. Again, we ask that you pose no oral questions this evening, simply because we've tried to put together a balanced panel with many differing viewpoints and differing expertise, and we want to maintain an environment where we can hear what everyone has to say. So please feel free to think of a question you'd like to pose and submit it in written form on this card. We will have runners, who are a bunch of student volunteers who are all members of our geology club at Utica College. They're the young individuals wearing the orange shirts that you'll see around the room. They will come and gather up the cards and bring them up front to Dr. Schoonmaker, who will sort through them, group them by topic, and then hand on to me representative questions from each sort of topic that I will pose to the panel members. Please understand that the turnout is wonderful and huge, as you can see, which means we're probably going to get a lot of questions. We won't possibly be able to pose all of them, so we'll try to pick representative examples from each, and we'll get through as many as we can in the limited time we have available before the forum ends at 9:30. Before I begin, I want to take a minute and just thank the individuals who were instrumental in bringing this forum to us tonight. It includes John Johnson, who is Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, who is sponsoring the event. Again, Adam Schoonmaker, who put our panel together. The IT department, who is providing technical support, which is much appreciated tonight. And most importantly, I'd like to thank Carlton Corey and President Todd Hutton. Their conversation at the Mum Farm is actually what sparked the idea for Utica College to host this forum, so I thank them. Just a couple more brief things before we start. In case you miss anything in tonight's forum, if we're going fast or it gets a little noisy or something, it is being videotaped, and the video will be posted within a couple of days. Give them a little time to get it up on the web, and you will be able to find it at the website that's listed on the pamphlet that's on your seat. Okay? This is the Utica College pamphlet that accompanies this forum. And I do want to mention that there is other information being handed out at tonight's gathering. Be aware of the fact that those are not college-sanctioned materials. Okay? There's a number of different groups with differing interests providing other information. Okay? Those will be available at the doors. The table's right next to the door over here, and also on the other side. The other nuts and bolts thing is if you could all do me a favor and take out your cell phones. And I take them out now before we forget. It's easy to, I know. Take those out and please turn those off. Again, we have great panelists here with wonderful expertise to share, and we all want to hear it. Terrific. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Having done that, I am very eager to introduce our first speaker. Our first panelist is Bruce Selleck. He is the Whitnall Professor of Geology at Colgate University. Bruce received his bachelor's degree from Colgate in 1971 and his PhD from the University of Rochester in 1975. He has been a member of the faculty in the Department of Geology at Colgate since 1974 and currently serves as interim dean of the faculty and provost. Selleck's research interests include analysis of the environment of deposition of sedimentary rocks in eastern North America, Alaska, and Australia, and his recent work includes geochemical and structural studies of the Marcellus Formation and the Utica Formation. So please join me in welcoming Bruce Selleck.
I'm used to talking for 50 minutes, so normal college lecture period, so 10 minutes is pretty short. So I'm going to go fast. I apologize. If there are details that you need to ask, please write them down and we can come back later on. The map here is upstate New York and the rest of New England and southern Ontario during a cold winter breakout in that's December 2006. That's why we need energy, just to remind you. But I put this up here to also demonstrate that some of my work is funded by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, Colgate University itself, and the American Chemical Society. And basically, I'm a geologist. I look at rocks. I love rocks. And we got a lot of them in this area, and I'm going to talk about them real fast. Basically, I want to, in 10 minutes, say a few words about this thing we call the Appalachian Basin, talk about 3 rock formations that occur at the surface in central New York and have gas in them in the subsurface, the Herkimer, the Utica, and the Marcellus, and give you an idea of where those are distributed at the depths that might allow them to be developed by high-volume hydraulic fracturing, particularly the Utica and the Marcellus. This map shows the region just covered by that map, formerly, or the area with all the snow on it. The Adirondacks are off, as everyone knows, just to our north and east here from Utica. And I'll just walk over to this map and point out approximately where Utica is located, because we'll be thinking about that over the next few slides, where things are located relative to where potentially the Utica and the Marcellus would be developed in this region. And I think having that geographic understanding is fundamental. The Appalachian Basin is that feature that is like it's like a trough that accumulated mud and sand back from about 500 million years ago to about 300 million years ago. And that extends down into Pennsylvania, out into Ohio, and further south into the Virginias, Kentucky, Tennessee. And that's, of course, where there's oil, gas, and coal that's been developed through the last 2 centuries. Okay, if we actually started up in Speculator and we walked towards the Pennsylvania border, that little black line up in the middle of the diagram on the upper left kind of depicts that path. And if we started in the Adirondacks, we would be on rocks that are 1 billion years old. They're called the basement. They contain lead, zinc, titanium ores, but no oil or gas. When we get to the edge of the Adirondacks, we start going through younger sedimentary rocks that contain oil, gas, in some cases. And I've indicated just in a very schematic fashion where the Utica, a unit called the Herkimer Sandstone, and the Marcellus Shale are located in the subsurface. This diagram is very important to understand because it shows that the rocks in New York from the Adirondacks towards the Pennsylvania border dip to the south, that's the term we use, like a tilted stack of books. And so progressively, as you walk towards the south, progressively younger rocks are exposed in the surface, and rocks that are exposed at the surface become progressively deeper as you go to the south. And there is a magic depth above which there's very little likelihood that natural gas by hydraulic fracturing would be developed in New York. That's about 2,500 feet following the current SGEIS. So here in Utica, yes, there's Utica Shale, but it's at the surface. It will never be developed here using current techniques. It's well to the south. The Herkimer Formation, and these maps will show us what we call fairways, that is areas of potential development. This is based upon my analysis of subsurface data that's currently available from the state of New York. The Herkimer has been developed in southern Madison and northern Shenango County, and there's some potential off to the south from there. These wells in the Herkimer are developed currently by drilling into the rock formations and then putting those wells into a horizontal orientation and drilling through fracture zones, naturally existing fracture zones. These are not hydraulically fractured wells. And here's an example just to show a schematic of what those look like, with the rock layers overlying and then descending to depth and developing down in a sandstone formation that lies, in this case, about 2,800 feet below ground surface. And there are a number of wells south of Hamilton, New York, and in the Norwich area that have been drilled by a company called Morse Energy, or Nornu. The Utica Shale, named for Utica, New York, and there's a lot of stories I could tell about the Utica and its relationship to the early natural historians in the Utica area. But the blue pattern on this map, and again for location purposes I'll walk over, here's Madison County, here's Oneida County. So Utica is in this area right here, and we are currently essentially about there on this map in Oneida County. This blue pattern shows where the Utica occurs at the surface in central and then down into the central New York and the Hudson Valley region. In outcrop, it looks like this. What is this thing that we call the Utica Shale? That's what it looks like. It has natural fractures in it to extract gas in the subsurface. However, in economic quantities, it needs to be hydraulically fractured. This map, and this is important, shows my best guess at the maximum limits of the Utica Shale, what I call high probability fairway. That limit lies south, basically south of Route 20. There is Utica at appropriate depths, but it's too thin and probably not developable by current technology as you go to the west. So that dark blob indicates the location of potential Utica development. Here's the Marcellus Shale, and very importantly, the Marcellus Shale lies above the Utica and above the Herkimer, so you need to go further south to find its outcrop belt. The red pattern here shows it basically going across central Madison County, approximately paralleling Route 20, and over into the Finger Lakes region, and then down into the Hudson Valley on the east. It too looks like this in outcrop. It is an unassuming sort of gray rock, originally deposited as mud. That mud contained organic material, dead plant material for the most part, that he accumulated along with the mud and is converted by burial into hydrocarbon gases. Here is my rendering of a map which shows the distribution of the Marcellus. You'll note where there would be potential to develop the Marcellus by hydraulic fracturing. It is south and east of this area, and again, I'll point out on the map where we are in the Utica area. So the Marcellus is well south. The potential areas of development are, and this is really the maximum limit, are probably well south of even where this dark blob is, but this is based upon the depths and potentially developable at sufficient thicknesses. So, what does the geology of this region tell us about the potential and the areas and the geographic distribution of development? It is that as we go to the south, it is only to the south that these units have the potential. And the depth is 2,500 feet, 2,500 feet. The current SGEIS has 2,000 feet as the limit, the emplacement depth of the potential fracture zone above a horizontal. I think most companies are going to use 2,500 feet or deeper. So what that does is it limits to the north the extent of potential development. And in New York, it is really for the Utica, south central Madison County, further south for the Marcellus, it's south central Shenango County, following the Route 12 corridor to the south. Now, there are other units, the Black River and Trenton, some deeper units, the Theresa and Potsdam, that I've not talked about. There is potential in other areas for those units. But these are the three major ones. The Herkimer currently, or just recently, has been developed, and there is shown in cross-section. Understanding this cross-section is really fundamental to understanding how the geology in this region works and how it constrains the potential development to regions, in the case of Utica, that lie well to our south. And I'll stop there. I think I got under 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll move on to our second speaker. Next up, we have Valerie Washington. Val is an environmental attorney and consultant, and having spent a career in various legal policy and advocacy positions in government and in nonprofit organizations, including regional attorney for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, assistant attorney general, overseeing the upstate offices of the New York Attorney General's Environmental Protection Bureau, and executive director of Environmental Advocates of New York. So please help me welcome Valerie.
I'm actually here because of a different job I had. The last job I had was starting in 2007. I was Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Environmental Conservation. I was in charge of 3 divisions. One of them was mineral resources, which happened to include oil and gas. And I was told when I came in,
I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to the microphone. And I was told that the Mineral Resources Division was just this quiet little division that I would never hear from. And practically everything I did had to do with Marcellus Shale in my last years at DEC. I retired from state service in December. But I was part of the team that made the decision when the first Marcellus Shale applications came in to put them on a shelf and do some studying first. And thank you for that, because New York gets its share of criticism. People have things pro and con to say about the GEIS and so forth, but we are the only state that has taken this kind of time to spend 4 years that we've been studying, and those applications are still on the shelf. I am a former regulator. I'm not here as representative of the Department of Environmental Conservation. I have a little different perspective, which I'm free to share now in my independent status, but I was brought here today to give you the background of what has happened at DEC in regard to the Marcellus Shale. And I'll try to be quick, go through these quickly. I hope some of this stuff can be discussed later in the question and answer. We've been doing gas drilling in New York for a long time, starting in the 1800s, and we've been doing horizontal drilling, also known as directional drilling, for a while too. In fact, when we stopped taking applications, maybe 1 in 10 of every drilling permit was for horizontal drilling. And as Bruce mentioned, it was used in formations that did not require stimulation or fracturing. Fracturing has been going on for even longer, several decades in New York. All shale, all these tight, what they call tight formations, have to be fractured to create the conduit for the gas. So neither of these things is new. What is new is the combination going down a mile, and yes, they say, and Bruce will give you a fairly big range of where it might be, but I hear, correct me if I'm wrong, that the sweet spot for the drilling is more closer to a mile below the surface. So that's a long way to go to send all that water under pressure to fracture. So it requires a lot of water. So what's new really is the combination of the directional drilling in the impermeable strata using hydrofracking. And here's just to give you a history. New York is an oil and gas state. Not a huge producer, but we've been doing it for an awful long time. The red dots is all gas. The green is oil, and one of the most fascinating things to me is we've permitted wells in the streets of Manhattan, those yellow wells down there, and they're used for thermal, heating in the winter, cooling in the summer. It's a alternative source of energy. And this is, I threw in some pictures because I've got so many words on my slide, but we don't have a lot of time. Everybody sees the pictures of the drill rigs. This is kind of what it looks like once the drill rigs are gone and they're in operation, right? This is what it's going to look like for the 20 plus years that gas is going to be coming out of those wells. The Christmas tree, it's called, the wellhead that comes out is a little bit taller than me. And I don't know how else to describe it, but this is the way the well pads I've seen look. This one I believe was in Pennsylvania. They look the same in the Barnett Shale in Texas. This is what Western New York is familiar with. Part of the reason people are so stunned, this has happened so quickly with the company people coming in, buying up leases. It was like a gold rush. Pretty shocking because this is all new. Part of the reason it's all new to this part of the state. This is Western New York. Again, you see the little red thing kind of in the lower left. That's the Christmas tree, and again is about my height, which will give you some perspective. Those tanks are brine that come up, naturally occurring saline fluids that come up as the gas is processed. Historically, that's been used to de-ice roads in Western New York. Those tanks tend to be smaller in the Marcellus. The ones I've seen in Pennsylvania are very small. It's really pretty dry gas that comes up with the Marcellus gas. This I threw in, I don't want to talk about it. So here's our decision that to study the impacts, and I'm not there anymore. The state is still going through the process. It was originally an environmental impact analysis only, and during the process, the agency has also developed regulations. So if you are commenting and you have your cards on your chair, and I just strongly encourage you, if you have an opinion, if you have thought, if you have something that you think that the agency should be focusing in and caring about, responding to, put it on that card. The process is very important, and now you're looking at they're all online. You're not just commenting on the latest draft of the environmental impact statement, you're also commenting on proposed regulations, and I'll try to explain the difference. It's complicated. So we had 14,000 people comment on the original draft last year. 14,000 people. This is unheard of. This is incredible. This has been one of the best public response to a government decision-making process that anybody's ever seen. Probably the biggest in New York. I've been an environmental lawyer for 35 years. I've never seen anything like the public involvement I've seen on this, not in Love Canal, not with any of the nuclear power plants, not with GE and the Hudson. Nothing compares to the public involvement. So, again, the permits are still on the shelf. Here was our thinking in 2008. We wanted a transparent process. The whole idea of an environmental impact statement is to understand fully what are the impacts, and if there are impacts, to mitigate them. That's what an environmental impact statement does under our law, our secret law in New York State. That's what we decided needed to be done. There was an environmental impact, generic environmental impact statement done on oil and gas drilling in 1992. We decided that this was different enough that it didn't cover all the questions that were going to come up with Marcellus Shale in 1992 that we needed to supplement. That's why it's got this ridiculous name of the draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement. The reason it's generic is it covers a whole program, not just individual permits. It's not a referendum. Are you for it? Are you against it? I find very few people that are not one or the other. But that isn't what the process is about. It's not, nobody is weighing those numbers in that way. The process won't be over when it's over. There'll be lawsuits. There's no question in my mind that people are already putting together their papers. I'll skip through some of this. Our history, our authority. I'll just say that it's not just the Minerals Division that works on this. It's air resources, water, solid and hazardous materials, fish and wildlife, very concerned about habitat, lands and forests, and so forth. They're all involved. One of my first meetings was with environmentalists, and they were sort of yelling at the mineral people saying, "You permit mining and drilling for oil and gas. What are you doing at DEC? You don't belong there. This is wrong. This is wrong that you're in the environmental agency." And I thought it was odd because where else would you rather it be? In other words, they're part of in my experience, an environmental protection culture, and they're surrounded by all these other people that have a say in what they do. I think that's a good thing. So I hope we can talk some more about this during the question and answer period.
Okay, and we're on to our third speaker, our third panelist. Next up we have Chris Kale. Chris is an independent planning consultant working with business, communities, and government on various economic development projects. She has a Master of Regional Planning degree from Cornell University with a specialization in community and economic development. She has recently been involved in projects focusing on food systems planning, rural development, agricultural investment infrastructure, and energy planning. Her most recent publications include an article this past summer for Energy Bulletin. Please join me in welcoming Chris Kale.
Thank you. I'm going to try to go really fast with this. As our first speaker mentioned, I used to be the teaching assistant for the Regional Economic Impact course at Cornell, and I'm used to having 50 minutes too, or maybe half a semester for this. But we're going to go real quick. If you have questions, please later for them. Basically, when you look at what the economic impact of an industrial activity is, you need to look at the different components. It might be different for the city of Utica than it is for the county of Oneida, than it is for the state as a whole. Individual communities, even to the south in the fairway, as you saw, may be impacted differently. So you need to really look specifically at the impact on the particular community that you're interested in. And I'm going to give you the tools here so that you can make your own choices with that. Cities should be carefully considered, though, because in general, where there's, this is mostly done in the rural areas, but you will have impacts that will accrue to the cities. For instance, if people are coming in and out from Texas or Colorado, where the headquarters of the companies are, they may be utilizing airports in major cities. If the folks from the man camp are going to go out and look for nightlife to spend their paychecks, they may not be doing it in a rural town that, rolls up the sidewalks at 3 o'clock. So the basic equation is the same, no matter which...
Bias there.
I'm sorry?
Bit bias there. The man camps, I mean, come on.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is pretty typical in Pennsylvania. Maybe other people can speak to that. That's the name of them. Again, because frequently there isn't housing in some of the rural areas that would be rental housing. But I thought we were going to wait for that. I'm going to go over if I take questions. I'm sorry. Anyway, so the way you're going to do an impact analysis is the same, no matter whether it's for the whole state or whatever. You're going to take the direct, indirect, and induced positive effects of whatever it is you're introducing, and then you're going to subtract the direct, indirect, and induced negative effects. So that's how it's done. When there's a small... it's a little difficult because usually when we do seeker, which is what the SGICE is for, we're looking at a particular thing. Oneida County is doing a new jail, and you're looking at what will be the impact of that building. This, of course, is over a much larger area, so you would also have sort of a statewide impact that you would look at. And particularly in those cases, you do want to take into account not only what might be added, but also what might be displaced. And that's important because not every study does that. So in addition, you will sometimes have people talk about what's called triple bottom line or full cost accounting. That's when you take into account sort of other things in addition. I'm going to just leave that if you want to ask me about that later, but sometimes that is a part of an economic impact study as well. And that makes it a little more complex. When everybody looks at the statewide governmental cost impact, that is definitely going to be a component. Because no matter where you live, how thick the shale is where you live, you pay state taxes. So if those state taxes go up or those state taxes go down, that has an impact on you. You're definitely going to want to, in working that out, the state will want to look at taxes, tax breaks, regulatory fees. Right now there is a ad valorem tax that is at the wellhead. It is not a per se severance tax. That's what most states have. We may get to that in New York State. We don't have it now. Also tax breaks and any regulatory like permit fees and that sort of thing, and any compensation that's passed through from the state to localities. Thus far, none of that has been proposed as of yet. So you also need to take into account the economic activity associated with additional governmental employees and that sort of thing. But again, most of the DEC operations and that sort of thing where they would be adding employees would be primarily in the New York City area. I'm sorry, the Albany area, or also sometimes New York City can have an effect depending on which agency you're talking about. They also have state officials there. At the community and regional economic impact level, you definitely want to look at your direct costs for local government services. That's, your roadways and your first responders and all that sort of thing, as well as what kind of impact it would have on your tax base. And that's important because that really can go two ways. As I said, there's the ad valorem tax. but then there also can be a negative impact on residential or surface housing values. You're also going to look at any state costs that are collected at the local level, such as an income or corporate tax. Most of those, that would be for people who are within the state. So that's one component. I'm going to kind of rush this a little bit. The direct effects, I have some examples there, are actually the money that is the investment in the new industry. That's how much gas is there and how much will be brought out over time, and what will it be sold at, and how much tax revenue will be paid. The how much gas is there has been very controversial recently. Those two in the middle, those two bars there, are the Energy Information Administration from 2011 estimate, and Terry Engelder from 2008. The most recent and most accurate assessment of how much Marcellus shale gas there is that can possibly, not profitably per se, but possibly technically be recovered is that bar on the far side here at 84, and those are trillion cubic feet. Now, of course, New York State's share of that is much less, as our first speaker explained. Another important thing is the how long. I want to point out for people who maybe can't see, this is from Chesapeake Energy, one of the companies working here, and they have for Marcellus a first-year decline in terms of the amount of recoverable gas of 75%. So in other words, all the gas that will be recovered from that well over the lifetime of the well, 75% is brought out in the first year. Now, those are months across the bottom. How long a Marcellus shale well lasts is, something that no one really knows for sure, because after all, we just started, 4 or 5 years ago at most. The DEC has projected 30 years. That is, a typical amount for a conventional gas well. The estimates I've been looking at will run anywhere from 5 to 10 years. At what cost is also important. That blue line across the top, these are various shale gas plays. And this is from a gas and oil industry investment firm that provides investors information. That blue line is the current rate that they can sell the gas. It's a little over, it's a post-tax break-even in U.S. dollars there, a little over 4. And as you can see, the Marcellus Northeast is almost profitable at current gas prices. So that means that all the mergers and acquisitions and everything are all about speculation that that this will be a profitable activity in the future sometime. So the indirect effects, those are the direct effects. The indirect effects would include sort of things having to do with the industry, but a little different. And those are some examples. I'm running out of time. It's very, very hard to make economics really quick and simple. But I did want to talk about jobs because I know that's important to people. I think Pennsylvania really gives us an opportunity to look from at least the statewide level at what the jobs impacts are. Since 2005, when Marcellus development in Pennsylvania really got going, both New York State and Pennsylvania have lost jobs, not gained them. And over that period, more jobs were lost in Pennsylvania than in New York State by a factor of 9 to 1. So in other words, for every 1 job lost in New York State, there were 9 jobs lost in Pennsylvania. So that gets us back to what I started with here, that you definitely want to look at what the positive effects are, and that, conceivably job creation, but you also do want to look at potential job destruction.
Thank you very much. I would like to just, for a moment, remind everybody that we will not accept oral questions during these presentations. They're 10 minutes long. That's not much time. We need to allow our speakers to get through this information they're willing to share with us. Our next speaker up is Rich Nyahay, and I hope I've said your name correctly. Yes. Rich holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in geology from SUNY College at Plattsburgh. He was employed as a geologist at the New York State Geological Survey and State Museum in the Oil and Gas Office from 1988 to 2008. He joined GasDem USA as a geology and geophysics manager in August 2008. Rich.
I too will try to be pretty quick. 10 minutes is an awful small amount of time. Ross #1 well. This well was drilled in Otsego County, and we fracked both the Marcellus and the Utica. Stratigraphic table. Basically, the Marcellus sits on top of the Utica, and 2,000 feet separate the two formations. 2 wells were drilled back in 2007 and were fracked using the current SGIS rules. And again, you are able to frack a well with a maximum of 80,000 gallons. Both of these wells were fracked with 40,000 gallons. And I bring that number up to you because I'm getting another slide. I'm going to talk about that. When I first started my job back in August of 2008, this appeared in my local papers. And this list of questions is what I try to answer every day. So as much as I like to talk about rocks being a geologist, today I'm going to talk a lot about water. Well density. This is Chautauqua County. Val talked about this county before. There's roughly about 10,000 wells drilled here. And approximately 8,500 of them have been fracked. And at intervals between 2,300 and 3,500 feet below the surface, with volumes of water anywhere from 20,000 gallons to 80,000 gallons. So New York has a pretty big history in front of it. So if we take a look at this county, this should be the poster child for water contamination or well contamination or aquifer contamination. So I want to give you a little hint about what goes on before you get a permit. And these are the steps that you have to take. And let me just read them off to you because they're pretty interesting. 1, you can only target one formation. You can't target multiple formations, just one. You have to state that. In the past, you had to meet with the mineral resources people. But now you have to meet with other divisions, whether it be water resources, air and resources, solid waste. What we did was develop a baseline testing of the area that we were going to drill. This was very important. A lot of companies before didn't think that this was important. This is very important. Well casing and cement requirements are put forth to the DEC before you get a permit. You do not get a permit without doing that, so they have to review that. They also have to review any frac constituents and the volumes that you add. And the general rule of thumb is 90% water, 10% proppant, which might be sand to open up the fractures, and 1% chemicals. Then you also have to give them a plan and a backup plan, an A plan and a B plan of where you plan to dispose of this. And there has to be letters that communicate between the DEC and the areas or places that you're taking your frack water. The Ross well took 1 year to get a permit. Actually, it took 13 months. So it's not something that happens overnight. So what I want to talk about today are analytes that we test. This is our basic water test. Our test starts at $700. On occasion, people have said that water test costs $30,000. That's not the case. You could go from $700 and we ranged up to maybe $3,000 on some wells, depending on how many of these elements that we tested. Here's the Ross well. The green line is a 2-mile radius. The red line is a mile radius. This is what we tested. As I can recall, there's about 18 to 19 residences, 12 surface waters, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Not only do you have to get one permit, you also have to get another permit, and because we're in the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. Again, this is a permit to use water from a public water source. Yep, sorry. Wrong button. That was quick. Almost. Okay, this is the water source. Basically, we had to also get another permit from the SRBC to do that also. Frack Ingredients. This is what goes into Frack Ingredients. And I want to point out this one here, the antimicrobial agent. It's important because basically that's the stuff that would kill any good bacteria. And if you bring your water to a wastewater treatment plant, you would suspect that in their digesters that might kill off any of their bacteria, the good bacteria that they use to clean water. So the next point here is, all of a sudden, everyone thinks that we're going to have a lot of water in the hole. This is the Shekels well. I pointed that out right in the beginning. 40,000 gallons of water. Approximately 43% of that water comes out of the hole. So we're left with approximately 20,000 gallons of water. In order for me to start the discussion with the DEC, I had to get a sample from this well. I was able to get out less than a liter of sample. These are the analysis for that well to begin that discussion. Headworks analysis. This is the stuff that you need to know if you're going to transport your frack water to a wastewater treatment plant. They have to have one of these reports by state law that determines how the water is characterized and what they can handle. Pretty extensive. The next important thing is casing. And New York stands head and shoulders above any state when it comes to casing. This is a casing program for the Ross #1. Again, this was reviewed by the DEC before we even get a permit. So we couldn't even use a different casing program if we had one. What you'll see is a DEC inspector right there. I apologize for the poor picture. But again, when you're doing a cementing job, the DEC is on site. You do not move unless this inspector says, yes, you can do this. That's what it looks like when it's finally done. The cement is a donut. Just to make sure you run a cement bond log. The Ross permit encompasses 9 pages. Lots of stuff. A report about well cuttings. Well cuttings are thought to be radioactive and dangerous. This report suggests that they're not. Again, the commissioner cites that same report for Chemung County to accept well cuttings. This is the most important slide I've got because this tells you that how flexible the DEC really is and the power. I had a permit 2 weeks before I started to drill. All of a sudden, I was informed that I had to add a stormwater pollution prevention plan. Notice, this didn't come into effect until May 31, 2010. The Ross 1 was fracked in 2009. So it just goes to show you that the DEC at any moment of the process can step in and add something to their regulations as needed. Of course, the frack water is tested. This is just an executive analysis of it. This is available through many websites. Again, more of that. What we had to do when we brought the water up to Watertown, we had to test it. This is the most tested well in the state. And like I told you, the bacteria was tested against the flowback. There was no problems with it. And again, if you need a copy of this report, we have it. This shows you the amount of solids and chlorides. Additional testing was done 35 days after the frack water was introduced at the wastewater treatment plant because the New York DEC said that will be done. Again, testing, again, this is a well that we've tested multiple times before and after. You won't see too much of a difference. Again, same with B. Again, this is data after 1 year. When you take a look, you can see the range before, range and after, compared to the USGS and our frack water analysis right here. When we test wells, we look for methane also. Brings us to this important paper, the Osborne Duke study. Again, I bet you didn't know that the Ross 1 was part of that study, though we were basically blamed that there might be well or methane contamination from wells. Again, these green points are dots that kind of are used to type gas, and you don't see that none of those came from the Utica. Again, here's another slide that shows the ranges that we tested for and what the Duke paper tested for. And again, you're going to find not too much difference. Again, at the end, you have to reclaim the well and bring it back to more of its original site by New York State law. You can see the Christmas tree way out there. Lessons learned. Will the flowback chemistry change when a larger amount of water is used? Yes, it will. But if you'd like, I'd show you some results from a 1 million gallon frac. It doesn't change substantially. More documentation is needed to show that the method of hydrofracking does not affect groundwater. I wouldn't accept what I've got, but I'd like to see more data. Transparency is necessary if this process is to be trusted. And new supplemental guidelines might be out at the end of this year, and this process has kind of allowed us to test some of the new lessons that we've learned. Thank you.
He was formerly with the energy industry, having co-owned Northrop Energy, which was sold to Arco Solar and subsequently became BP Solar. He was also a partner and investor in the acquisition and sale of offshore oil rigs, including the Teledyne fleet and WR Grace fleets, and an investor in oil and gas project. He holds degrees from Southern Methodist University and the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm going to talk about the current draft of the SGUYs. If I can get this thing out of here, and how it might be. Thanks a lot. Sorry to do that. A way to respond to it. But if your town doesn't have a land use ordinance or a road use plan, the SGUYs, the regs that the DEC are promulgated, are going to pretty much regulate drilling and fracking in your township. So it's important that you understand the SGUYs and frankly that you respond to it. You go to the meetings and you respond to it. The SGUYs, this third draft of it, and in my opinion, it consists of basically bogus economics. Chris was kind of polite about it. We'll talk about that in just a second. There's political carve-outs that, famously for the New York City reservoirs. There's other carve-outs as well. But it's kind of a mass of carve-outs. There's token regulations, and we'll discuss the token aspect of them. And then there's what I consider junk science. The main difference between, is that on? Yeah, hallelujah. In New York, hydrologically, and the West, is that the water wells out west are generally tapping very deep aquifers. That well shown in that diagram on the far right, it's like, for instance, on our ranch outside San Antonio, you'd hit water at about 1,000 feet. And that basically provides those wells out west some degree of protection from surface pollutants and also from contaminants that might come out of the shale frack. That's really important because obviously the wells around here are very shallow. You're basically drinking groundwater. The part of the problem is that when you drill a well, and not necessarily frack it, but when you drill it, you can mobilize methane out of shallow gas layers that you drill through. And there's, as those slides show, there's plenty of shallow gas layers that hit, and also out of the target formation. And the way it comes up is not from the inside, from the production tubing, but it can come up from the outside of the outermost casing. So if you add another casing, go from 2 to 3 or 3 to 5, if methane is coming up from the outside of the outermost casing, the number of casings doesn't matter. This is a well-known phenomenon. It happens in a lot of wells, in gas wells. That's how gas comes out of a shallow formation or the target formation up into groundwater. Again, if you're not drinking groundwater in Colorado and New Mexico, it's not a problem. If you're drinking groundwater, it becomes a problem. That last slide, this slide is from Alberta. Again, it basically shows the different ways that gas can be mobilized, can come up through a well, a plugged well, through the outside of the casing, or through the casing itself. This is a well-known phenomena. This is a study that Schlumberger did back in 2003. And basically it shows that what happens is that the methane will be mobilized over time. The first year you didn't expect to see it a lot. That's why you didn't see it coming out of the Ross 1 of Otsego County. Over time, by the third, the fourth, the fifth, by the 10th year, methane will be mobilized on the outside of the outermost casing. And so in that test study, by say the 10th year, 25% of those wells were leaking. Again, on the outside of the outer casing. Not enough to make the well uneconomic, but enough to pollute any groundwater that happened to be near the well. This is the Duke study. Rich mentioned it. Basically, there were some anomalies, and in fact, the Ross well is an anomaly. And it's because if you test these wells, if you test the water too soon after the gas well has been drilled, you're not going to see this phenomenon. If you wait 2, 3, 5 years, you begin to see methane mobilized up to the water. That's basically what the Duke study found. 58% of the wells that they tested, 62 wells, mainly in Pennsylvania, had elevated levels of methane if they were within 1,000 feet or 3,000 feet of an active gas well. That's what happens. Again, if you're out in Colorado, it doesn't matter because there's no groundwater. Now, back to the SGIs. The setbacks proposed in the SGI are strictly a function of population density. Meaning, if you live in New York City, you've got a great setback of a gas well from your drinking water. If you're a farmer and you have one water well, then the setback is 500 feet. So, and it's directly proportional. The setbacks for water sources are a function of the population. That's basically what that slide shows. That vertical line is basically 3,300 feet, which might be considered the safe distance of a gas well from a water source. So, other than New York City, all of those other water sources are basically vulnerable. Now, they talk about how great the regs are, in New York State. Well, actually, they're terrible. And all you have to do is compare them to the regs, and again, use the setbacks from a gas well as the metric. And so, you look, for a house, you could drill a gas well 100 feet from a house in New York City, in New York State. In Alberta, which doesn't happen to be in the United States, it's 350 feet to a mile. In Texas, it's 1,000 feet. In Wyoming, 350 feet. New Mexico, 1,000 feet. 10 times further in New Mexico than in New York State, the setback. And you can hear this stuff about how great the regs are here, or how tough they are. From a school, 150 feet, gas well, 150 feet from this school in New York State. Texas, 1,000 feet. New Mexico, 750 feet. From a water well, New York State, 500 feet. You drill, spud a gas well 500 feet from a water well in this state. New Mexico, 750. Tell me all about this, how tough it is around here. From a stream, from a trout stream in New York, 150 feet is a setback. It's nothing. That's the way to kill trout. In New Mexico, they like trout more out there, 1,000 feet. From a pond in New York State, setback is 0. They don't like fish around here. They don't like cattle. New Mexico, they like cattle. They like fish, 1,000 feet. From a historical site, 0 in New York State. You don't think much of your history. New Mexico, they don't have much history, so the gas well setback is 750 feet. From a park, setback, gas well from a park, 0 feet. Tough regulations, right? In Utah, it's a mile. Okay, then Chris mentioned this. The problem with the economic study in the SGIs is they don't state what the gas reserves are. So they do all these extrapolations, all these jobs and stuff, tax revenue, but they don't bother to say what the they don't say what the reserves are, the estimate. So you have to do forensic on that. You come back, you see that the total Marcellus, like she says, 84 trillion. The low estimate for New York State alone is 40. The high estimate is 237 trillion. And I don't think so. You know, it's good to be an optimist, but it's not good to be a liar. The gas well zoning in near, well, the DEC says they'll consider zoning in the application, so that's good. It's 8.115. They have in the past deferred the zoning. The DEC won't issue a permit, you know, if it's zoned against them. So zoning controls in every other state. All the states where all these other gas companies are from, you know, Chesapeake, whatnot. It's going to work here. It's going to control here. It's either going to happen in court, it's going to be litigated that well, or the legislature, the Senate, is going to pass a law to make sure that it happens here, the way it is in all other states. A town is better off with a land use ordinance in this state and any other state than not have a land use ordinance. The DEC, they've said consistently that they defer to zoning. I'm not going to read that, but basically that's what they've said. Every time they're asked in the past, we defer to zoning. Okay, let's see it. These are some of the towns that have passed different road use ordinances, land use ordinances. You know, they're all over the state. Like, in the Marcellus, in the Utica. That would be consistent with what you find out west. Towns would have ordinances that address road use ordinance, land use ordinances. You know, big deal. Get used to it. Your town needs to have a road use permitting system. It needs to have a road use ordinance system. That's common out west. It's legal in this state. You need to have it. Every town, every county needs to address the impact of trucking. You know, it takes 1,000 runs, big trucks, frack one lateral, drill and frack one lateral. You know, maybe 20 laterals on a site. So, you know, it adds up. 40,000 drive-bys to go into that pretty little, you know, Christmas tree. You wouldn't want to live anywhere near the damn thing, I'll tell you that. So you should respond to the S guys. It may be the only protection you have, and it is kind of like a vote. You know, it's your opportunity. In fact, it's one place where you can vote more than once. You can send in more than, which, you know, a dream come true. You can send in as many responses as you want. Now, we put together a little website, tiny URL, you know, and it's on your handouts there. I suggest you go to that website, and it's sort of a guide, gives you some, I know I'm going over. Gives you a little guidelines as to how you can respond to it. You may not agree with everything we put on there, but it gives you some indication of how you might respond to the yes guys. Thank you very much.
Hello? Can you guys hear me? Okay, I guess I'm on. It just sounds quieter all of a sudden. Okay, I first of all want to take a minute and thank our 5 panelists. So thank you very much. The presentation portion of this event is over, and I'd like at this point to take a very brief 5 to not more than 10-minute recess so that we can set up our tables and actually bring our panelists up front for the question and answer portion of the forum. So, thank you. At this point, we're going to begin our question and answer session, although we will start, first off, with a series of questions that were determined by the organizing committee for tonight's forum. In the meantime, please remember that when you arrived, you had one of these index cards on your seat. Please feel free to write down a question you would like posed, and our students in the orange shirts are running around and gathering those and bringing them up to Dr. Schoonmaker. And again, remember, unfortunately, we have probably close to 400 people here this evening, which is wonderful, but it means we're going to get a lot of questions, and there's no way we'll get through all of them, but we'll do our best. Okay, so write your question down, keep it to a single question on the card if you could, and write neatly, which would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, but let's begin with a question that the organizing committee had developed. And we'll start with Val. Val, the Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement provides restrictions on minimum depths of rock that can be fractured. However, the SEQRA permit, in the SEQRA permit, these restrictions can be lifted. Under what conditions can we expect an SEQRA permit to be issued?
This is the, between the 1,000 feet and the 2,000 feet? Is that I thought I was, there. Is it, you're talking about between the 1,000 feet and the 2,000 feet?
Yes, where in the generic environmental impact statement it would be prohibited.
Right, Bruce mentioned that the generic impact statement talks about a Marcellus Shale possibly starting at 2,500 feet. I don't think anybody believes it's actually you're going to get at that level. I don't think you're ever going to get an application for between 1,000 feet and 2,000 feet. If you did, I don't know if this is what Chip referred to when he talked about a carve-out, but this environmental impact statement wouldn't cover it. Meaning you'd have to come in, if you wanted to do that, and apply for a permit with a full analysis, a brand new environmental impact statement, which is discouraging, to say the least. This one has taken 4 years. And so if somebody wants to take that on themselves, they can do that. They have to come in, they have to go through what this environmental impact statement does, go through all the possible environmental impacts and talk about how they would mitigate them. And then it would be up to the agency, the commission, to decide whether the environment would be safe or not.
Okay, terrific, thank you. The next question I have is for Chris. The gas industry often promotes the creation of jobs as an incentive for states to allow hydrofracking of black shales. Can you describe who gets these jobs and how long on average these jobs exist?
Okay, whoops, is this on?
Yes.
Okay. For starters, in terms of, who gets what jobs, it depends to a certain extent on what what part of the industry you're talking about. People tend to, think about what happens at the wellhead, right? But of course, that's only a part of the entire shale gas play. In fact, recently there was an article in Forbes magazine about the guy who runs Chesapeake, and a goodly proportion of their business plan is in sort of options and derivatives. So those jobs, for instance, again, might be located in New York City, the trading component. If you have, investment sales, that could be anywhere around the world, really. So where the jobs are depends, to a certain extent on where the headquarters of the operation is. Again, we just had in this area, I think, Gastem, which I believe is from Canada, is that accurate? Montreal, and Norse Energy, which is of course from Norway. So some of those jobs are going to be located, in the areas where their headquarters are. The jobs associated with the longest period of time that a particular wellhead is going, are very similar to the slide that I think Val showed, which is, the wells there and the capital investment does its things, and there are no workers.
Can I just ask a follow-up or maybe get a little more specific, but at the wellhead, are those jobs likely to go to the local individuals living in that area?
Well, as I said, at the wellhead, over most of the life of the well, there are no jobs there. There's just equipment. It's a very capital-intensive operation. So for most of the period of time, there aren't any jobs. In the period that the wells are being drilled, which is a fairly short period of time, yes, they will bring usually specialist companies that, I'm sorry, it is the term that the companies themselves use, man camp. They bring workers in, usually from the Oklahoma, Texas area, who are, professionals at building these things. There might be some local jobs, certainly trucking the water is possibly, something that could be done by locals. And then, they use a tremendous amount of gravel and concrete, so that also needs to be trucked. And then, certainly it also, the gravel needs to be mined, so if you do have this kind of development, you will have more gravel mines because it costs a lot to bring gravel from a long distance.
Okay.
And people might be employed in that.
Terrific, great, thank you. Next up is a question for Rich. Will the industry be releasing the contents of hydrofracking fluids when and if it is allowed in New York?
Well, as I said during my presentation, basically the chemicals are reviewed by the DEC. There's MSDS sheets, exact volumes that are going to be used, and the amount of water that's going to be used. Whether that industry does it or not is, up to that service industry. My guess is, as we go through this, everyone has their proprietary mix. Eventually, we'll get beyond that, and probably, I know Range Resources releases some of the chemicals that it puts into its frack to the public. So again, it's up to the service company releasing the company to release that data.
Okay, great, thank you. Next, I have another question for Val. There are some unplugged wells in New York, and the question is, how many abandoned unplugged wells are there currently in New York State?
A lot, and it's a problem. And I think it's a serious problem, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. And we've, over the course of time, since the mid-1800s, about 70,000 oil and gas wells have been drilled in New York. And most of those were pre-regulatory, before there were any requirements, or records. So over time, the state has looked for those and tried to map them. We've mapped about 40,000 of them. We have a priority list of about 500. There's a fund to plug those. $100 a well when people get a permit. It's clearly not enough. So the state plugs a few of these wells every year. In the days when there was enough staff that they occasionally had downtime, they would spend a lot of time looking for these old wells, using old aerial photographs, old town records and so forth. Hunters frequently find them. The saddest thing is when a kid falls down, or when groundwater is polluted, because they do create a conduit between geologic layers. So they're a very serious problem. They aren't talked about. We don't have a big enough fund to clean them up. And since we've had a regulatory regime in New York, there is a requirement when you get a permit, you have to buy a bond to cover the cost of plugging a well. So we don't have abandoned wells anymore. We have tens of millions of dollars that the state is holding on to. So if a driller fails to plug a well and the well is stopped producing, there is funding to pay. Again, this is a pre-regulatory issue. During World War II, in fact, some people were pulling steel from these wells as scrap. So they do create a great vulnerability.
Okay, terrific, thank you. Okay, and I have another question for Chris. And I believe in your presentation I heard that there's a range of estimates of how much natural gas is expected to be recoverable from the Marcellus Shale. What are the dollars attached to that? What are the estimates of the value of the natural gas that can be recovered from the Marcellus and perhaps also the Utica?
Well, if I could do that, I would be a very wealthy woman. That is what all of the hullabaloo is about. As I said, right now, the value of the shale, Marcellus Shale, dry gas in the northern portion doesn't really quite cover expenses. But, the estimation, and it's realistic, we hit peak oil several years back now. It's not a theory, it's a fact. We are getting less and less oil, and the oil that we get costs more than it used to. However, the trajectory right now for the cost of natural gas has been going down for the past couple of years. So right now, we're in a period of time where the price is decreasing. You know, there is a lot of speculation that at some time that cost might go up. You know, a house is worth exactly how much someone will pay for it, and a gas well is also worth exactly how much someone will pay for it. And, you know, the economy goes through different cycles, and at some points, your house might be worth more, and at some points it might be worth less, and at some points, the asset booked as gas in the ground may be considered at, you know, a certain value over a certain number of years to extract it.
Okay.
Other times, others.
Right.
Very hard to tell, but there are certainly a lot of people on Wall Street making bets one way or the other.
Right, okay, thank you very much. We're finally to our audience submitted questions, so here's the first one. It's for Rich. If gas companies are not required to disclose what chemicals they are using, how can we know if the wells, if the wells or fluids are being tested for such chemicals? Sorry, kind of difficult handwriting.
Well, again, what you would see generally is an increase in chlorides, in total dissolved solids, stuff that we showed on that slide from the R flow back analysis. You would see that in water wells. Again, we don't find that in water wells. And what we have done is not just test before and after. We've spent some time and spent a year, sometimes a year and a half testing different intervals, because basically the water quality changes almost during the seasons. So you have to be able to get a better gauge on that. So we're confident that, again, the frac fluid didn't make it into the water wells. Again, the Duke study even quoted that same thesis, and so did Dr. Ingrafia of Cornell. But again, he wonders about the probabilities of it making it into a well over time.
Okay, thank you very much. We're having a little technical snafu, which hopefully will go away soon. Here's a question for Chip. Could the panel please address some concerns raised in the movie Gasland, such as flammable tap water, animals losing their hair, the improper disposal of wastewater, and cancer clusters around drilling sites?
Next question.
This is for
Is
Chip.
for me?
Yes.
Well, I guess I'm not an expert on the movie Gaslands, but God, what was all that stuff? Well, okay, like the flammable tap water. Well, a couple of things. First of all, methane can occur naturally in groundwater. In fact, it does occur naturally in groundwater in this part of the world. If there was groundwater in Texas, I'm sure it would occur there as well. But you can get elevated levels of methane in groundwater in your drinking wells by if the water well is in proximity to a gas well that's aging poorly, meaning that the gas is migrating up on the outside of the outermost casing. So that would precipitate methane up into the groundwater and at sufficient levels that makes the water non-potable. And, you know, I guess if the cows lost their hair, maybe you could blame that on them. And even to levels where methane will be sufficient to flare out of and make dramatic a scene in a movie. So they did. So that's not an uncommon problem. Some of the thing about Gaslands is some of that is it was a little melodramatic, but it did highlight some real problems that are obviously worth addressing and investigating. So here's to that.
Thank you.
Sharon.
Can you guys hear me?
Where would you go with your head concern?
Sharon, can I just put something on that?
Yes, actually, we'd like to let our other panelists take a brief moment to rebut that.
So I was talking to myself.
Can you guys hear us?
I'm not sure that
I don't know.
these things
The mics are not working. Can you hear us?
Just be really loud.
All right.
Okay, this is not a...
If I stand up, can you hear me?
There we
Okay.
Hey, I get to answer again, Rich.
Better with buzz and having the microphone on.
No.
You just turned, okay, so that's what we're gonna do
You all
for a
didn't
while.
hear a
We're
word I
trying to
said,
fix
did
it, okay?
They like it, Chip. They heard it. Just a quick point. Basically, when we did a 2-mile radius around the Ross, according to Chip's anomaly that we are, we should have methane gas. There was a well called the Bomb that was drilled less than 1.5 miles from the Ross number 1. And again, we tested water wells around the Bomb well, didn't see any increase in methane. Wonder why?
Okay, I have another.
It's been 20 years.
Can I have just a quick answer to that too? I just happen to have a personal experience. I grew up in the Albany, New York area, and when I was 13, I lived in a old farmhouse that had a well that had methane in it, and it was vented, and again, it was natural methane. But I think one of the things Gasland shows is very dramatic that, you can set your tap on fire, but in the case of the house I lived in, it caused an explosion when the furnace kicked on and the house, exploded. So realistically, the issue with Gasland, is very dramatic, but my concern would be much more for, for the safety aspects than the sort of, can you set your water on fire or how bad it tastes or whatever. If there is methane migration, either from natural causes or from the kind of thing that might happen, like with the Duke study, there are risks to the residential population at that time.
Okay. Are we back?
Yeah.
We are back. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Oh, yeah, that's better. That's better. Okay, I have another question for Rich. In light of recent flooding we've seen in central New York, what are the risks of floods to gas drilling sites?
Basically, what we used are closed tank systems, so there'll be no risk. No open pits.
Okay. Here's a question for Chris. Are you suggesting job losses in Pennsylvania is due to fracking? Please explain.
No, I'm not. That's one thing you'll find with people who look at economics is that we don't try to sort of say why something happens. That's why we're so dismal. We just simply say, this is what happened. I've done some smaller scale work on Bradford County in particularly with agriculture. Over time, it's not clear. You get effects in both directions on a more localized basis. For some dairy farmers that may consider themselves sunset farmers, this is their way to stop milking cows, and that may go away. For other people, they may, view it differently. But certainly that is the sort of thing that you would want the S guys to look into. What I found in my review of the socioeconomic impact analysis of the S guys was essentially that they did not get that information from Pennsylvania.
Right.
Now, I haven't done it myself, but I do think we should do it. Because clearly, over the whole state, the U.S. labor statistics are what they are.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next up is a question for Bruce. Are the gas companies going to do a geologic survey to eliminate possibilities of fault line fractures that would lead to fracking fluids surfacing or contaminating drinking water?
Right, and this is is this on?
Yeah.
This is a question that's often asked is pre-existing fractures that might promote the vertical migration of fractured fluids. And when I give the extended version of this talk, one of the points I make near the end is it's not the fracturing process at depth that is the concern to the surface aquifers. It's what a number of us have mentioned here. It's the impacts at the surface and the near surface portion of the well casing. Certainly, the gas companies that are drilling anywhere in the world want to know where pre-existing faults are. And in almost every case I can think of in the current development in Pennsylvania, there's seismic profiling that's done prior to drilling, and that allows the companies to identify problematic structures. And what we mean by problematic structures would be, for example, faults which might penetrate from the rocks at depth to the surface. Is there an ironclad no way that fracture fluids could ever move up along pre-existing fracture systems? There's no ironclad guarantee. The physics of the water and the pressure gradients that exist in the subsurface make it very, very, very unlikely that those fluids at depth, and here we're talking 4,000, 5,000 feet, would migrate up. It's near the surface that the concern lies.
Okay. I have a different question, but maybe related, I guess, so I'll pose it again to Bruce. Is there any evidence hydrofracking can cause earthquakes?
Highly debated, because there was the earthquake in Virginia, the earthquake swarm in Virginia, and there was one in northern Arkansas just this last week, a set of earthquakes in Oklahoma. Each of those has been, hydraulic fracturing has been invoked in various ways. I'm not a seismologist, that is an earthquake specialist, but the scale of energy release during hydraulic fracturing is of a whole different magnitude than the scale of release, say, in what we call deep well injection. And it's been shown, it was shown back in the 1960s, that deep well, and this is 15 or more thousand feet into the subsurface, deep well injection at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal north of Denver did allow slip on a seismic fault, and it promoted earthquakes. I think deep well injection is a separate issue, although people sometimes conflate the two. Deep well injection is the getting rid of problematic fluids by putting them deep, and that is depths of usually many thousands, if not 10, 15, 20,000 feet of depth into porous rock formations. Those are the depths where seismic strain, that is the forces have built up in the Earth's crust sufficient to produce earthquakes. And here we're talking, for example, the earthquake that damaged the Washington Monument came into being at a depth of almost 4 kilometers. So that's, if you do the math, that's 4,000 meters. That's about 13 or 14,000 feet of depth. So you really need to get down to fairly deep in the earth to promote earthquakes of the scale that we've seen. Also, I'd say the cases in northern Arkansas and the one in Oklahoma, the sort of spatial relationships don't really work. Earthquakes occur in clusters. We know that, particularly the mid-continent earthquakes. But as with anything else, let's keep watching what's going on.
Okay. The next question is for Val. Who is it that pays for the water testing associated with fracking? Is it the taxpayers or the gas companies?
That's the gas companies. And it's interesting how the word fracking is used. As you've heard the speakers talk today, almost all the problems that people talk about that are associated with this activity has to do with drilling and not fracking. There's something about that word. One of the responses to the New York Times article said, just the word fracking gives me chills, and it does me too. But it is, the problems with the methane is with drilling and casing of the drill bores. The problems with the earthquakes that we know about are from these deep wells that they're drilling. The word fracking is sort of taken on a generic name for the whole process. From what I've seen, the real serious problems associated with drilling these impermeable layers have very little to do with fracking. They have a lot to do with drilling. They have a lot to do with water management. They have a lot to do with flowback.
Great, thank you. And actually, another question for you, Val. What regulations will be put into place to protect the usage of water from streams, lakes, and ponds?
That's a good question. I have a slide that shows some water usage. If I could just ask you to guess what the biggest use of water in the state is, you'd probably all guess it right. public water supply, drinking water, public water supply. The second biggest use is what?
Golf courses.
Energy. Energy, not hydrofracking, but energy. Hydropower. Then, and cooling, and then the third is the surprising one. Recreation. Now, I'm not talking about swimming pools.
I knew the golf courses were there.
Watering golf courses. And watering golf courses actually uses, if we were using water at the rate that Pennsylvania is for hydrofracking, it would be about 15% of what we use for watering golf courses.
A golf course is not consumptive use.
That's right. That's exactly right. It goes back into so it is a different kind of use. Which I'm trying to put it in perspective because of the concern about withdrawals. And the key on withdrawals is that it's not the amount that's so scary, it's where you take it from and when. You don't want to be taking it from small tributaries. You don't want to be taking it out during low flow seasons. So this was a piece of the environmental impact statement that was not done by the mineral people at all. It was done by the fish and wildlife people. The fish and wildlife people came up with a formula based on protection of habitat, of when, the kind of analysis you have to do before you can put in a plan for withdrawing water.
Okay, great, thank you.
And actually, I think that is one of the things that I find most important from an economic point of view, because it's sort of the difference between renting something and owning it and taking it to the dump. When you withdraw water for use in a golf course, it stays within the system. So you use it and then it becomes reused and it goes back into the clouds and it comes down again as rain. Very different if you take the same amount of water and stuff it into a deep injection well down under the ground several miles, because at that point you've actually removed that permanently from any future use.
I agree with that, but just to respond, we don't do deep injection wells, and we don't have the geology for it.
No,
Bruce can explain that, but I...
it would have to go out of state, which,
Right now, most of it actually stays in the formation, in the shale. What, 20%? About 20% comes back as flowback.
right, so you've taken the part that's already down there, the 80%, and that's gone permanently from anything anybody can use in the future, and then the other 20% gets trucked to Ohio. And the same thing happens. It goes in
Where
are they taking it?
Would you go out to the audience and answering the question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well,
Yeah, we probably should move on.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Just something I wanted to know about.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we have asked our panelists to, answer and then offer one rebuttal, but I think we'll have to just keep it limited to one rebuttal. Okay, so the next question is for Rich. What is the contingency plan for a Christmas tree rig that malfunctions?
A Christmas tree plant that malfunctions, usually that's not going to happen. What you're going to have happen is when you drill and the well gets out of control. And this brings us to a good story. Basically, what's on site is called kill fluid. So it's heavy brine liquid that will be on site just in case a well gets out of control, and they pump this fluid down to drown out the well. Now, when we were drilling the Ross #1, this fluid was sent out to Watertown and basically got sent back. I was at many meetings where I heard that I had frack trucks all over the state, but it was this truck that got sent up to Watertown because the brine fluid wasn't thoroughly tested. We retested the brine fluid, it went back up to Watertown, and they accepted it. But again, that's the standard procedure. And with the Canadian company that I work for, they use a BOP, basically that sits on top of the well, and there's these, what are called rams. And basically there's these little turning radiuses, and then most rigs just use one, maybe two. The Canadians use three. So we were able to, if there was a problem that would happen, we had 3 blind rams to shut down the well plus kill fluid. So again, I wouldn't worry about the Christmas tree, it's when you're drilling the well.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Chris. Have the banks refused or restricted mortgages in frac areas?
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on. There's definitely there are some of the major lenders who simply aren't willing to write mortgages if there is a gas well on the property or nearby on a neighbor's property. Then in addition, there have also been some issues with the requirements of the secondary mortgage market and specifically New York State's setbacks from residences. Chip's slide showed how our setbacks from houses are less than many other places. They're 100 feet. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Farmers Home Administration, and so on are generally requiring 250 feet. Additionally, in some cases, and there was just some documentation of this in the New York Times a month or so ago, there's a situation where most people's mortgages, existing mortgages, prohibit the commercial use of a residential property. So you are in technical non-conformance with your mortgage contract when you have this industrial commercial activity going on your residential property. Now again, of course, this doesn't apply to bare land. This is all about residences and mortgages. And you know, several banks said in the New York Times article, oh, we would probably not make an issue with that. But you know, it does put you in a bad situation because you are technically not fulfilling your side of a contract, and if they wanted to foreclose on you, that they could.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Val. Will New York State DEC have adequate resources and personnel to oversee and enforce the new regulations?
That's a really critical question in the enforcement part. It isn't just running the program. The enforcement part is absolutely essential. Can you hear me? Sorry. When I was there, the analysis we did, we talked about how many hours, person hours, it takes to review a permit application and go through the whole process. Unlike Pennsylvania, we're there when they do the cementing. We're there when they test the blowout valve. We go there in advance when they're siting it, and we're there when they reclaim it. So in a conventional vertical well, I think, if I remember right, 40 or 50 hours, person hours involved in a single permit. Many, many times that for one of these deep horizontal wells. So what we said in the draft environmental impact statement, we will only do as many wells as we have the personnel for. So it's not going to be 1,000 permits a well like Pennsylvania. It'd be tough to get to 100, I think, depending on how much staff is there. So to me, I think that's a good approach to it. You only do what you have the staff to do. My worry, of course, is over the years, DE staff has diminished. In the early 80s, we had 3 volumes of environmental conservation law. Now we have 8, and we have the same number of people. Things aren't getting done, and they keep cutting back, and people want smaller government, and that seems to be the trend. So it may start out that way, but I worry that there will be an expectation of a certain pace, and we'll still be fighting these budget battles. So it is definitely an area that's going to require extreme vigilance and concern on the part of the public to make sure that that what we start out promising happens through the years as we go forward.
Right. Great.
Yeah, if I may, there's no way the DEC can contend with this activity. The DEC has about 15 minerals management agents on its staff. The New York State has no money to pay to regulate this industry. And the reason why is New York State is one of the only 2 states in the United States that does not tax gas at the wellhead. Gas is tax exempt in this state. It's the only one of 2 states. That means that the state of New York derives no direct benefit from these wells. That means that the DEC has no money to regulate these wells. New York is one of the few places in the planet that doesn't tax gas at the wellhead. Every state except this state and Pennsylvania tax it at the wellhead, and they have a property tax on it. New York State has a property tax on gas wells. Pennsylvania does not. Every other state has a property tax on oil and gas wells.
Okay.
So this state is starved of funding to even bother to regulate this thing.
Thank you.
Just to correct, I can't I mean, I agree with the notion that New York State taxes gas as it's an ad valorem tax that's added to the property value on an annual basis for the property on which it's produced, and the gas company pays the local. And that is actually different from many states.
That's true. Every state except 2 have a property tax on gas wells, oil and gas wells.
29 states do, many do not because there's no gas production, but that's another story. And it is the case that in New York there is probably going to be, if we ever see this, a movement to develop a severance tax that would go, it might support the DEC in its effort to provide better regulation of the process. My very deep concern is that it would simply go into the state's general fund and disappear. I would much prefer that local municipalities be able to develop their own taxing structure as basically a value subtracted tax that would benefit local communities and local county and town and village governments. The problem in New York is if there probably will be a new tax that will be voted in should gas shale development move forward. It will disappear into the general fund, not benefit the DEC, and not benefit that very small area where the real impacts are going to be felt. So you need, if you want to activate on an issue that's related to taxation, it's make sure the taxes flow to those places that are actually impacted by the development.
Okay.
And I would have to disagree that.
Okay, I think at this point we've had kind of a series of rebuttals. I think we'd like to move on.
Okay, well, there are impacts beyond the place the well is.
Right. Okay, next question. All right, this one goes to Bruce. If gas development lies to the south of here, why are leases being sought in this area, including places like Clinton, the town of Paris, and Waterville?
Yeah, I mean, there's some speculation going on. There have been a couple of companies that have come in and tried to assemble landowners into basically, they're not really coalitions, they're groups of leased properties. Looking at the geology, these are organizations that are not interested in development, they're interested in land acquisition, and then promoting, I don't want to call anyone unscrupulous, but promoting what is probably low-value leased property for sale to unsuspecting clients that have more money. The truth, however, beyond the Utica and the Marcellus is that there are other more deep gas units, such as the Trenton Black River, which has been developed very successfully in the Southern Finger Lakes. The Potsdam, the Theresa are other potential units. And so the maps that I show only address where the Utica and the Marcellus are likely to be developed, not some of these other deeper units.
Thank you. Here's a question for Rich. What is the purpose of adding the chemicals to the fracking fluid?
Well, basically, there's many purposes. As you go down depth, basically it gets warmer. So when we add microbial type agents or microbial agents, you want to kill bacteria because it's getting warmer. Basically, they add other surfactants and stuff like that to make the water slide quickly or make it, more slippery than it is. So that's the method that's been used to crack or make the rock break open. They use proppants like sand. We've also used a proppant that's a carbon mix, which is an ultralight piece of carbon that's really, really round. So when you put it in, you get more porosity to it. So there's many things that we do, and it always evolves. I was asked a question at the break, why do we put HCl in the fluid? And basically, it's 7 to 15%, diluted HCl. But when we make perforations in the casing to get to the shale, when we break it, or at least have to break it to, send fluid through these small holes, it's surrounded by cement. So the HCl reacts with cement. Many students here take Geology 101. That was part of Geology 101 classes for decades. Now I hear it may not be. But those are some of the fluids that we use. And again, it's totally evolving. What we use today will not be what we use probably 5 or 6 years from now. Because basically, this is a business that's generated to make money or to make profit. And the way they can do that is by using better products. Whether they're green products, then they can promote that. So the companies that have these type of research and development things going on, they're going to succeed. It's going to other companies that say, this is our their secret formula, per se. Those are the companies that will probably go away.
Okay, great, thank you. And I have a follow-up question related to that. Where will the frac fluid wastewater go? And is it true that it is planned to be stored in old salt mines in the Finger Lakes? That was for Rich, but Bruce, if you'd rather handle that?
Whatever. Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, frac, again, as Rich said, the disposal of flowback water. And again, what happens is you pump for a frac state, for a horizontal, it may be a few million gallons of water fluid down. It looks like from what's going on in Pennsylvania, about 80% of that actually gets soaked up by the formation. The Marcellus is actually a really dry place. It's like a sponge. It soaks up that water. The stuff that comes back out, of course, is salty. It's got a lot of ground up rock in it and some of the residual materials from the fracturing fluid. And it's that material that flowback water, of course, is problematic. And currently, it's been in a variety of ways either disposed of in water treatment plants that are permitted to do that in Pennsylvania. There's been some deep well injection in Ohio, although I think most companies are moving away from that because it's very expensive. At the end of the day, probably the most recent developments are finding ways to treat that water on site, to take care of it by filtering it, removing the salt, recycling it into further use, or basically evaporating it out and recovering all the salt and material that's left. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a matter of cost and regulation. And I think in New York State, the more we can regulate that to assure that companies are going to be forced by regulation to do on-site treatment so that we don't have a disposal problem. In terms of the old salt mines, no. I don't think there's anyone who thinks that that's a realistic way of disposing of fluid. We've certainly got some old collapsed salt mines that have polluted groundwater in the north central Finger Lakes region, and that's an ongoing problem.
Okay,
If I may, you cannot get rid of frac flowback in Pennsylvania by taking it to a municipal treatment plant. It's illegal to do that in Pennsylvania. It's also illegal to do that in Texas. It's going to be illegal in this state. They tried to do it for a while in Auburn. They were trucking frac flowback out of Pennsylvania in here to try and dump it into a municipal treatment plant. The reason why you can't do that is because it's laced with radium, strontium, arsenic, everything that it leaches out of the shale, not just the green frac fluid that doesn't exist. That comes out of the shale. That's in the frac water, and that's why you can't take it to a municipal treatment plant anymore in Pennsylvania. The fact is there's no place in this state to economically and environmentally get rid of the hundreds of millions of gallons of frac flowback that would come out of these horizontal wells. The way they do it out west is they put it in deep injection wells. There's 12,000 permitted EPA Class 2 injection wells in Texas. There's 22,000 in California. That's economic. It's environmentally safe. Sure, you'll have an earthquake every now and then when you do that, but there's no place to get rid of it economically and environmentally safely in this state. That's why they truck it to Pennsylvania. And Chris is right. That's why they truck it to those disposal wells in Ohio, which are the closest disposal wells to get rid of that stuff. So don't be misled by this stuff about, green frack fluid and it comes back with a little brine. You wouldn't want to drink the stuff, let me tell you that.
Thank you.
The flowback is very problematic, and it's problematic for a number of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is salt. It's not easy to get salt out of water. Well, there are methods to do it, but it's very expensive and energy intensive. I don't think a lot of the companies want to spend that money. More and more, Chesapeake has been doing a lot of recycling. We're trying different things, but from a regulatory point of view, part of the permit application is telling the government what they're going to do with the flowback. And so it's a limiting factor until there are solutions. I don't think there are a lot of them now. There aren't a lot of solutions now on how to deal with the flowback, and I agree, it's expensive and energy intensive, but you don't get a permit until you figure it out. So it's going to be actually a limiting factor in how quickly, if and when DEC starts issuing permits, how quickly we're going to be doing the water.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question for you, Val. Why doesn't the SGEIS include a detailed health impact assessment?
That's traditionally not part of GEIS. I was there when we did the first draft, and we pursued it the way we've always done GEIS, by bringing all the state agencies that have any connection with it. So the health department was involved from the beginning to end, and a lot of the material in the GEIS came from the health department. What a specific study would look like would be novel. It's something that's being demanded. People need to hear it. People are upset. Drinking water goes, it's a very emotional issue. It goes to the heart of our concerns about the environment. So I haven't ever seen something like this before. I just want to be clear that to the extent that people think that the health department hasn't been involved, they've been involved from day one in every single chapter of the GEIS. The separate health study, to me, is not.
A lot of times, the things that would have a health study would be more at a local rather than a state level. So for instance, again, we're working under seeker here, and seeker is frequently done by the municipality when it's not a generic one. So for instance, issues of air pollution are frequently a part of a seeker process that might be done in an urban area, in a place, for instance, where there was going to be a lot of trucking. There might be estimates made of the increased incidence of asthma due to the diesel fuel, that sort of thing. But I think Val's, got a point that when a statewide generic impact statement is done, that's a little different. It's much more typical in the kind of situation where you're going to have some sort of a manufacturing facility or whatever, which is also regulated under SECRA, but again, not through the state, through the municipality.
Okay, I'd like to let Bruce respond.
Just very quickly, this has been one of my major, I actually responded to all three of the drafts at some length, and this is one of the issues that I think folks here ought to really address in their comments. That is that I don't think an adequate health impact study has been done and should be done. There is data now. We've got Pennsylvania, we've got Colorado and other states. The other thing is, the point is, the local municipalities in the areas where the impacts are most likely to be felt are not capable of mounting the sorts of health impact studies that would be done under seeker. We're talking about Shenango County, southern Madison County, rural, poor communities where the resources are simply not available, including even doing zoning. Clearly Cooperstown and the towns around Cooperstown can afford that. The town of Lebanon, where I live, cannot. The state needs to step in and help beyond just the current process. It needs to be involved in making resources available to local municipalities who are going to be impacted.
Thank you.
And that's true for health. It's true on so many issues that in other states, when they're looking at severance taxes, some of them are talking about taking a big hunk of that, taking it to the municipalities. The impacts are at the local level, and I absolutely agree that we need a severance tax in New York, and I think that severance tax should. They disappear. I don't remember who said it, but these special funds disappear. They get swept. They call it sweeping these. So the Environmental Protection Fund has been swept for the last few years whenever we have a budget crunches. So if there's a mechanism to get this money, severance money, back to the municipalities to deal with these local problems, infrastructure issues, planning issues, boom and bust education issues, there's a lot of social, cultural, economic, physical impacts on localities that the state doesn't have any jurisdiction over, and they need money. I agree, I absolutely agree. Okay.
However, to take Ioga's view on that, and they just recently put out their response to the SGICE. Ioga is the Oil and Gas Industry Trade Association. It's all well and good to imagine all of the things that we might do from taxing the industry, but you saw my graph. You can't do much in the way of taking money from the industry and not cause them to be terribly unprofitable, since they're not profitable at current prices already.
Okay, at this point, guys, I'd like to move on. We don't have that much time left, and I know we have a very thick pile of questions, which certainly we won't be able to get to all of them, but here's a few more at least. One for Bruce. What are the chances of radioactive water coming out of local wells?
Well, first of all, there's naturally occurring radioactivity in the Marcellus and the Utica Shale, and there are plenty of water wells that have nothing to do with natural gas development, that have radon emission as a real problem, and we have plenty of households. We have to test for radon in large areas of New York State even to get a building permit or get a mortgage. The whole question of naturally occurring radioactivity that's specifically associated with Marcellus development, the process brings up well cuttings. In fact, one of the areas of my research and my students' research involves looking at what's in those well cuttings and the degree of problem. There are a few cases of brines that have been in contact with Marcellus in gas wells that have elevated levels of radioactivity. Most of the flowback water that's been tested that I'm aware of anyway, in Pennsylvania, elevated either in the well cuttings or the flowback materials or the drilling mud is pretty low. What does accumulate over time in metal and materials that are in contact with the water in the Marcellus, we get what's called scale. That can have very high levels. In general, I think the release of radon from rock near the surface could be enhanced during a drilling process just by vibration and ground shaking and other things. That's been shown to happen during earthquakes. There's short-term release of radon gas. Over the long term, I don't see this as a big worry. I do worry about the pipe scale issue and the handling of materials that come out of anything that's been in contact with Marcellus for a long period of time in the subsurface is going to have pipe scale with probably elevated radioactivity.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is for Rich. Who is responsible for damage to roads, nearby properties, and pollution to water supplies?
Well, the one case that I can talk about is the Ross #1. In the town of Maryland, we put up a bond, and the roads were inspected before and afterwards. That's the best we can do. I also know that a lot of communities are having their roads inspected by private companies, so that they know the condition of their roads before and after also.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, the state allows counties, townships, cities, villages to enact road use permitting ordinances and road use ordinances to define where trucks can go by weight, by number of trips, and also have a permitting system that if they tear, or when they tear the road up, they have to pay for it. And I would strongly suggest any town, city, village, or county that you live in, that you make sure that they enact those ordinances.
Great, thank
Because I
you.
wouldn't depend on the kindness of Texans to fix your road once they tear them up.
Thank you. The next question is for Val. Is it true that the state or federal government can override a local ordinance that prohibits hydrofracking?
Not the federal government. The federal government has very little to do with drilling. The federal government has very little to do with drilling or hydrofracking. Everybody knows about the so-called Halliburton exemption. In New York, that's not an issue because we regulate under our clean water. We regulate under our own laws. So we are prohibited by that exemption from regulating it, and we will continue to do it. But our state statute gives the state exclusive jurisdiction over oil and gas extraction. So localities are preempted by law from trying to regulate oil and gas extraction. In the past couple of years, with the interest in Marcellus Shale, there have been various statutes proposed to change that or to give localities some more protection. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, you'll be able to find some friendly legislators that might be interested in working with you.
Okay, thank you.
The state, no state in the United States, no municipality in the United States regulates oil and gas drilling. That's not the issue. It's all done by state regulatory agencies, Minerals Management Agency, Texas Railroad Commission in Texas. That's not the issue. What's at issue is whether a municipality can use its zoning powers, its land use powers, to decide where gas wells can be drilled or not. And the fact is that every state, and certainly every state that either of these operators come from, Chesapeake, Oklahoma City, Anschutz, Denver, Range, Fort Worth, XTO, Fort Worth, they'd have to go to their city hall to get a permit to drill a gas well. And when they come to New York, they're going to have to do the same damn thing.
Okay.
The state has always said they've done things on a scientific basis. If anybody saw the Times Herald editorial today, complaining about the politics that enter this, the New York City watershed being the primary example. Setbacks are based on a number of things. One thing is consistency with state setbacks for other industries. But the question is, what's the purpose of the setback? If the purpose of the setback is to deal with spills, you have, as has been discussed, you're going to have the closed loop system with the containers. You're going to have secondary containers. So the question is, what are you protecting whatever's off the well pad from? Well, a spill from a truck, for example. How fast does the spill move? How much does the soil absorb it? Those are the kinds of questions that are asked when you develop a setback. My experience with setbacks is they go well beyond what the actual threat is. It's belt and suspenders, which I, by the way, totally agree with. It varies greatly from place to place. And you can call it political to the extent it goes beyond what's actually scientific. But while we're on the subject of where New York is with other states, this is the one area where I see a big difference. I have to disagree pretty strongly with Chip about where New York is compared to other states. You look at the problem, some of the problems out west. There, for years and years and years, they were putting flow back into open pits, unlined open pits, and the method for dealing with the flow back is a sump. We could never get away with it here, and we don't have enough sump. But they were evaporating the stuff and then burying the sludge. In Pennsylvania, in Dimmitt, when Cabot did the bad cementing jobs on those wells, their punishment was to have the state inspector there when they were to file a plan, have the inspector there and do logs. That's their punishment for having done a bad welling job. That's always been required in New York. You've had to have the plan, you have to have the logs, you have to have the inspector there. New York is not the Wild West, and I'm sure you could find areas where one state did something a little bit more protective than New York. Overall, I would say our protections, especially until recently, Colorado has done a lot better. Even Wyoming's done a lot better in Texas and so forth. They're all waking up. And I give the public of New York the credit for waking people up. We're the environmentalists in this state. There's a lot of environmental concern, sensitivity in this state that drives our environmental policies and our laws and regulations. It's generally a good thing and a positive thing, and I think generally we are a little step above other states.
Okay.
The question was, why are the setbacks in New York State less than they are in other states? And wait a minute, and I don't know how you want, but the answer is that the setback for a gas well in this state is 100 foot from a man's house and 150 foot from a schoolyard, and that's not the way it is in Texas. It's 1,000 feet, 750 feet in Colorado.
Okay.
So the short answer is that we've been through 3 iterations of this draft, of this S-guys, and it's still 100
I think we need at this point to move on. The next question. No, I think at this point we're going to move on to another question, please. Okay. At this point, I have a question for Chris. Okay. Does the gas that is currently produced in New York State stay in the state and lower our gas prices?
Okay, yeah, economics is complicated.
Okay, please let our panelists speak.
And, it can be hard to get these things. Right now, we have what you would consider to be a glut of natural gas on a national level. That's driving the price down. As I said, the price is decreasing. Now, it's a commodity that's priced on a world market. So it's not the same kind of thing as, if the local grocery store bought too many tomatoes. It's not on that kind of a level. What is going on is that all across the country, and just recently in Niagara Falls, the natural gas importing facilities that have been there and working over the years, bringing natural gas in from Canada or elsewhere as liquid natural gas. All across the U.S. now, these facilities are applying to the federal government to transition from being natural gas importing facilities to being natural gas exporting facilities. Now, the fact of the matter is many other countries, actually at this point, the entire European Parliament is considering not allowing hydrofracking in all of Europe. France has already voted to disallow it. So there's, at this point, a fair amount of readiness in places like Louisiana, and then also in New York State at Niagara Falls, to be shipping that commodity to places where it will command a higher price. So over time, I think you might find that that the gas becomes primarily an export rather than, now of course, we can't say, oh, we're not going to allow them to sell it to the highest bidder. You know, we're as the United States very involved in the WTO, and you're not allowed to do that. You simply have to sell it where it will, you know, you have to allow people to sell it where it will command the highest price. So I think there has been a lot of, you know, a lot of hype around that concept that somehow by producing gas here, that we would then have gas that only we could use. But in reality, it's a very transportable thing once you turn it into the liquid natural gas. And at current prices, again, it is entirely economical for that to be turned into liquid natural gas. And in our area, it would most probably be headed, you know, through Niagara Falls, either to Europe or to Canada. They're also, depending on what happens with the tar sands, they will be requiring a large amount of natural gas for that purpose.
Can we maybe cut that one short? We are almost at 9:30. I think we have time for one last question, if we can keep it brief. This one is for Rich. Are there any treatment plants in New York that can return the frack fluid to drinking water quality? And if not, who will pay to build them? The taxpayers?
Well, basically, that's a two-part question. Each plant can handle a certain amount of frack water, and that is something that you would look at when you do a headworks analysis, and that's required for each water treatment plant in the state. Am I right, Valerie, on that?
Yeah.
So if your requirements can meet that, or your frack fluid can meet those standards, then those wastewater treatment plants can handle that frack water. And when we took the frack water up to Watertown, again, the water was tested before on the anaerobic and digesters, bacteria hadn't defined. They were able to handle that waste because they basically knew what was coming. And again, their effluent was tested 35 days afterwards. Again, ordered by the New York DEC. So again, these are published results. These are not made up. These are not, you know, in my heart. This is what's fact. Can other New York wastewater treatment plants handle it? Probably the answer is yes. But again, it's all due to what the headworks analysis for each plant.
This is, if I may, you keep talking about the Ross 1 well. That was a little dinky vertical test well. That was not a horizontal, that is out of hundreds of millions of gallons of one of the horizontally hydrofracked shale. That was a little dinky test well. Hey, wait, I'm not through with you.
No, because this is the problem.
And so he uses this anecdote as if that's going to extrapolate to the whole state, and it's not.
Here it goes.
He came to Otsego County at $3 a share, and he's thinking 9 cents a share.
I need to stop the debate.
Thank you.
Okay, we have reached the 9:30 time mark. So I'd like to say a few things in closing before we head out. Please, if I could have your attention for just 1 minute, okay? The purpose of this evening's forum was to inform you and allow you to make informed recommendations to the New York State DEC. There are...
Are they here to be our concern?
Excuse me, can I finish? Because I think I'll address that, okay? On the back of the flyer that was on your seat, there are a number of mechanisms detailed here by which you can express your concerns, your comments, your recommendations. Please do so. Okay, there is information to send your comments in by the web. There is information to send your comments in writing, and there are a number of meetings that will be held and attended by DEC representatives. There are several of them listed here, and if you will indulge me for a minute.
Listen up.
There are two that did not make it into our flyer that may be of interest. One of them is tomorrow, November 10th. It's going to be held at SUNY Oneonta at 7 o'clock p.m. in the Hunt Union Ballroom on Ravine Parkway. The second one that is not in the flyer will be held on December 1st in Ithaca, New York at 7 p.m. in the State Theater. And one more announcement that I was asked to present is that there's a lecture on hydrofracking by Anthony Ingraffia that will be held at Hamilton College on November 22nd at 6:30. On behalf of Utica College, the School of Arts and Sciences, and the Department of Geology, I hope you guys have found this to be a very informative forum, and I thank our panelists very much for being generous with me.